Hi, my name is Leslie Terebesi, and this is the sixth and last video in a series on the question of how Islam became political. First, let us recap the first five lessons. As you will recall, we started with the first stage of this whole process, and that stage consisted basically of the repression of reason in Muslim world, and this repression of reason had three manifestations. First, it was manifested in a theological sense in the acceptance of the prophetic tradition, according to which the prophet has basically stated that, or allegedly stated, that anyone who uses his reason to understand the revelation or to interpret the Quran is actually committing an act of disbelief or kufr. So now this was a highly problematic statement because, as we have seen, it had the effect of discouraging people from using their reason in order to understand revelation. And if we are discouraged in using our reason to understand the revelation or the Quran, then how can we possibly follow the Quran? How can we follow that which we do not understand? Or how can we follow that which we are advised not to understand using our reason? So now this brings us to the second stage, which was the elevation of tradition or the prophetic traditions known as the ahadith to a level of equality with the Quran. This was expressed in a concept of the so-called dual revelation or wahi-ain, and this became actually part of mainstream Islam. According to this narrative, the Prophet allegedly said that he was given two things, the Quran and something equal or similar to it, as some renditions of the Hadith put it. And this other thing that is either equal or similar to the Quran was nothing but the Hadith or the Ahadith, to be more precise. So now we have actually two types of divine revelation in Islam. That was the second stage. Now, according to Tahajabir Rawani, by the way, this equation of tradition and revelation was actually a tragedy because Muslims began to legislate on the basis of the Hadith in addition to the legislation based on the Quran, and this, according to him, led to a creation of a parallel system of legislation based on the hadith or the traditions, parallel to the system of legislation based on the Quran. So now there's a chap in Canada by the name of Dr. Omar Ramahi, and he takes this a step further, and he in fact maintains that the making the hadith as a basis for legislation has actually resulted in what he called a parallel religion. Now, however that may be, this brings us to the third stage in this process of the politicization of Islam, and that third stage consists in a further elevation of tradition. In this case, the elevation of tradition to be a judge of revelation or an interpreter of revelation. So now here we see that the relationship between the Quran and the Sunnah was basically turned upside down, with the Sunnah or the Ahadith being placed above the Quran or the Word of God. Now this strikes us as highly problematic because it runs not only against the traditional ranking of the roots of the Sharia, in which the Quran occupies the first place and is followed by the Sunnah, but it also appears to be also appears to run counter to the teaching of Tawhid or monotheism, according to which the highest authority in Islam is Allah, and no other authority can be placed above the authority of Allah, and that includes the authority of the Sunnah or the Ahadith. So we have here a sort of breach of the traditional understanding of the relationship between the Quran and the tradition, in which the tradition is always subordinate and subordinated to the revelation. Now, the fourth stage in this process, you will recall, was another step in the same direction, basically. And this step consisted of the acceptance of the teaching or doctrine of abrogation, of revelation by tradition. Here we once again see a tradition or man-made reports known as the hadiths actually abrogating the words of God in the Quran. Now, this sounds quite preposterous, and according to Taha Jabir al-Wani, once again, he argues in his book called titled "The Reviving the Balance." He argues that in fact, the majority of the ulama in traditional or classical Islam, in fact, accepted the principle that a solitary hadith, in other words, a hadith with a single line of narration, is capable to abrogate a Quranic verse. Now, this is also quite remarkable because it, of course, once again, reflects the reversal of the relationship between the Quran and Sunnah, and it takes it to a further height. So now, basically, with the doctrine of abrogation, the words of human beings or the rulings based on the words of human beings, the hadiths, are basically replacing the rulings based on the word of God. One example or two suffice. First, we have the example of the adultery, the punishment for adultery. In the Quran, the punishment is specified as 100 lashes based on a conviction where 4 witnesses testified that this crime actually took place. So, but the tradition actually replaces this punishment of the 100 lashes by the death penalty or death by stoning. So this is again very remarkable that this actually occurred, because once again we see here that the words of human beings have in effect overruled the words of God. Another example is the penalty for apostasy. We know that Al-Quran does not prescribe any penalty for apostasy, and because it treats apostasy basically as a sin which is punishable in a hereafter but not punishable in this life. Yet the exegetes and the ulema, the jurists, have declared that the right punishment, the correct punishment for apostasy is the death penalty. Once again, we can see here, apart from the politicization of Islam, because this death penalty for apostasy was also used to suppress political dissent, we see once again that in adopting the death penalty for apostasy, contrary to the teaching of the Quran, the ulama have actually once again allowed the words of human beings to overrule the words of God. So now this brings us to the last stage, the stage that I want to focus in this last video, the remainder of this last video, which is the emergence of political Islam in the form of the adoption of the doctrine of the so-called clash between the abode of war and the abode of peace, in Arabic known as the al-Harb and the Islam. Now, the ulama who have advocated the alleged abrogation of the peace verses in the Quran by the ayah as-Saif in Surah number 9, verse number 5, basically stated and declared that waging war by the people of the peace, and notice the irony here, by the way, we, the people of the peace, according to these ulama, are required from a religious point of view to wage war on the people living outside of the abode of peace, what they call the abode of war. And we, moreover, are required to do this once a year, every year, and even when the non-Muslims in the so-called abode of war are not waging war on Islam. Now, this is rather preposterous, because it not only contradicts the Quran, which allows war only in self-defense and never in any kind of offensive capacity, but this requirement to wage war on people who do not wage war on us actually also runs to common sense. Why would anyone in his right mind want to wage war on people that are not attacking this person or this community? So once again, here we can see a manifestation of this transformation of the religion of peace into a religion of conquest, as advocated by the supporters of the doctrine of the abrogation of the peace verses by the so-called verse of the sword. Now, as if this wasn't enough, the ulama have also brought to their aid some hadiths, notably the hadith which was also used by al-Baghdadi of ISIS to justify some of his crimes in Iraq at the time when ISIS was controlling parts of this country. And the hadith that he referred to, and which is referred to, by the way, by a group of scholars, in a letter that is available online, and the letter is called Letter to Baghdadi, and it can be accessed at the link lettertobaghdadi, one word.com. The ulama are criticizing al-Baghdadi's use of these hadiths in order to justify the kind of activities or extreme activities that ISIS was responsible during its time in Iraq. And this hadith, by the way, is very interesting for another reason, because it sounds very similar to a Quranic verse according to which the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, was sent as a mercy to all mankind. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. That is what the Quran says. But what does the hadith say? The hadith says something very similar with one very important difference. The hadith says, bless the Prophet Muhammad who was sent with the sword as a mercy to mankind. So now notice that this word sword is present in the hadith but is absent from the Quran. This shows very clearly that the hadith reflects what we could call a militant or a political manifestation of Islam, according to which Muslims are required by their religion to wage aggressive war, or jihad al-talab as it is sometimes known, against non-Muslims, even when the non-Muslims are not waging war against the Muslims. Now, to me, this manifestation of Islam in this form is actually a corruption of the original teaching of the Quran, which is that, yes, indeed, Islam is a religion of peace. Unfortunately, the way it has been interpreted, or rather misinterpreted, by the ulama, it actually begins to appear as a religion of conquest, if not even a religion of war. So we have to put a stop to this, and we have to remind everyone interested in the subject that indeed, and after all, Islam is a religion of peace if properly understood as it is explained in the Quran. We therefore have to reject the misinterpretations and misrepresentations of Islam as some kind of a militant ideology or religion, and we need to alert people to the fact that it is only the misinterpretations of the ulama that have turned Islam into a warlike religion, one that is bent on conquest and spreading, as it were, the religion of peace through the means of war. So I think that is all for this series, and I would like to conclude by thanking all the viewers for being with us all this while, and may God be with you, and we will see you soon, perhaps in another series or lecture series on some or on a given topic in Islam. Thank you.